All right, in this demo, we're going to go ahead and drape a very simple princess seam corset. We'll start a few inches above the bust, and then a few inches above the waist. The first thing we're going to do is take our muslin and find the salvage of it. We want length grain to run the length of the body, and we're going to line that up right against our center front. And we're going to pin in. And make sure when you're pinning the opposite direction of what you're draping, meaning I'm draping this way, so when I pull, it stays in place, okay? And we're just going to drape down our center front. I'm going to pin here, I'm going to come down and pin and lock in at waist to hold it in place. And then I'm coming a few inches below and pin right there as well. Okay, again, the edge of my salvage is lined up right with my center front. And I'm just going to pin this fabric up so it stays out of the way for a moment. And I'm going to put a few more pins in just to hold it in place. About every 3 inches or so, I'll put a pin in, 2 to 3 inches. And that way when I start smoothing out my fabric, it doesn't pull off the center front. Okay, now we're going to start smoothing over towards our princess seam, which is right here. Just take a pin from where you started and drag over until you feel princess seam, and go ahead and stick that pin right in. Notice my pins are going in the opposite direction than the ones I started with. I'm going to hold that fabric right in place. And come right to apex. The apex is where princess seam and bust line connect or intersect. I'm going to lock in there. And just keep coming over right to your princess seam and locking in. And you can see we're basically pulling all the bubbles or folds out of the fabric and smoothing it in place. Right along waist. And there we go. All right. So now what we can do is we can cut off. We want to leave we don't need all this extra fabric. We're going to start our next panel, the side front princess panel. Okay. So let's leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inches fabric right here. We also don't need all this length down here, so we'll remove some of that as well. And I'm going to come right down here and remove some of this extra fabric as well. Let's go ahead and mark in our princess seam. Your pen should be able to follow right down the ridge of it. Now my corset's going to stop a little somewhere in here, but I always like to leave extra at the bottom top, just in case something unforeseen happens. Let's mark waistline and bust line. Let's go ahead and unpin our princess seam. And we're just going to move our pins over about 1 inch over from princess seam. And that allows us to go ahead and move this out of the way so that we can start our side front princess panel. Okay, so let's prepare a piece of fabric for that. Okay, when preparing your next panel, so we've draped the center front panel. We're now going to drape the front princess panel. This is a piece of muslin I cut away from the one I was draping from. I want to add a grain line to this. I also like to even it out so you can see where I've cut it. What I'll do is I'll just tear away, giving myself a clean grain to work with. All right, and always remember where your cross grain is and your length grain, okay? On this piece I know because I have a salvage right here, okay? But you can also remember, like, the longer portion for you might be the length grain, so just remember that. It's very important in draping. Okay. So I just like to clean my pieces off like that. And then I need to add the grain line to this, okay? I like to try to find the center of the fabric. I'm just gonna kind of fold it in half like so, bringing length grain to length grain, give it a little crease like that so I have an idea where my center is. Now what I'll do is I'll measure off, in this case, salvage or your tore edge, doesn't really matter. All right, about to where that crease is. So if I put 12 on my ruler there, let's see, 12 and a half, and I'm just gonna mark this 2 different places and then connect. Like so. Here. Okay, so now my next panel is ready to be draped. And I have a grain line, and I'll just try to line this up with that center, the center of the next panel. Okay, so let's go ahead and drape this now. Okay, we've prepared a piece of fabric for this. Notice I've just taken and drawn a length grain right down the center of it. All right, so this is the length of my fabric. We're going to go ahead and place that length grain about right in the center of the princess panel, starting at the top. And I'm just going to kind of let it drape in place. And I'll put a pin right at the top to hold it in place. And then I'm just going to smooth down right to waist. So let it go ahead, fall and smooth. And we're going to lock it right in there at waist. Put 2 pins in so it locks. There we go. And now we'll go ahead and pin up that line. Locking it in all the way up. And we'll go just a little above, a few inches above our princess, or our bust line. And now let's go down from waist and lock it in there. Okay. Now we can go ahead and bring it out to our side seam. So side seam is usually a bulkier seam. That's where they bring, when they're creating the form, they bring the 2 fabrics together and hand stitch it closed. So just bring right out to side seam. You'll feel it. It's a nice, there's a nice ridge right there at side seam. Smooth that fabric out. And there we go. That's good. Okay. Now we need to bring our 2 pieces of fabric together at our princess seam. Okay. Like so, like it's a seam. I have a lot of fabric here, so I'm going to cut some of it away to make it easier to work with. Don't need as much as I have. Okay, so where I've already drawn princess seam here, that's where we want to bring these two pieces of fabric together. Okay, we want to make sure that the line I drew is kind of right against the form. We don't want it out like that. Okay, we want this, because it's going to end up being a corset, we want a nice tight fit. So just bring your two pieces of fabric together and then put that pin right through the line you already drew. Might take a little fiddling with it and rolling the fabrics between your two fingers, your thumb and your pointer. And there we go, we start right at waist, and then we're just going to pin up and then pin down. Typically the hardest part here is going over the bust. Okay, so again, I'm going through both layers just like I'm sewing this together. Okay, so you can see the pins right here as well. As you go around the bust, you'll naturally start creating ease on the princess panel side in the fabric, which is what you want. Now your fabric may start to pull around this bust. If that's the case, again, we're going to trim a little bit of this away, reduce that to about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And to make it a little easier, we can actually clip in and it won't pull so much on you. Okay. We're almost done. Go up about 2 more pin lengths. And 1 more. There we go. Now let's go below the waist and pin down that way. And 1 more pin. There we go. All right. Trim away some of this extra fabric. All right, so now we're going to turn here and we're going to, we've already marked the princess seam here. Okay. Now we need to go ahead and on this side, on the princess panel side, we're going to mark that princess seam as well. And you're just going to follow the pins in the ridge they create, like so. There we are. Let's also mark our side seam. Again, you should be able to fill that ridge, no problem. Let's mark the waist. And bust line. Okay, there will be ease on this side of the garment or the pattern. So we're going to mark that ease. Let's remove a little bit more of this fabric here. Easier to do. So about 2 inches or 1.5 inches to 2 inches above our bust line, I'm going to mark a notch here and below as well. Kind of tells us where our ease will be. Okay. All right. Now we're ready to start in the back. Let's go ahead and trim away this extra muslin. And I'll grab the other piece of fabric that I've prepped. Okay, so we're at center back now. Again, we could drape the next back princess panel, or we can drape our center back panel. I like to start at center back. Before we do that, let's go ahead and these pins at center back, let's remove a little more of this fabric. We don't need all that. Okay, and these pins here at side seam, let's move over about 1 inch so that we can move this back. And reveal side seam there. Okay, we're at center back now. I'm going to go ahead and line up my salvage, my length grain with my center back. And I'm going to pin it in place. I'm just going to smooth it out down the back, pinning in the opposite direction of which I'm going to drape. And I'll lock it in at waist, and then continue pinning down. I'm going to take this extra fabric right now and just kind of pin it out of the way. And I'll put a few more pins down here between waist and hip line. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and start smoothing this out towards our back princess seam. Again, we'll unpin this. Out from the pins you've already put in until you feel your back princess. And that's where you're going to go ahead. Let's put another pin in here. We don't need to be up this high. Okay. So let's go ahead and smooth out along there. All this extra fabric, we're going to actually remove some because it's way too much. And now we can just keep smoothing out. The extra fabric was pulling, causing me to get weird puckers, making it more difficult to drape. So I just removed it. I always like to have some extra fabric. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and mark out. We already have center back, which is right on the edge of our salvage. We're going to mark out our back princess seam. So let's follow that ridge right down. There we go. Let's mark our waistline. And our bust line. There we are. Let's remove this extra fabric we don't need here at the bottom. Leave about 1.5 inches here. Princess. And remove some of this extra fabric as well. Okay, let's prepare our last piece. We're going to drape our back princess, which will connect our back princess and that side seam. Okay, so let's go ahead and first remove these pins and bring them over about an inch away from our princess seam. Move that out of the way. And let's go ahead and take our last piece, and we're going to line up our grain line that we have drawn on here about with the center of this panel. And I'm just going to pin it in place up here, and now I'll just smooth it right down like so to my waistline, and I'm going to go ahead and lock in right at waistline like so. And I'm going to do this, I'm just going to lock this in all the way down now from waistline. And smooth up. It's already pretty smooth. And lock it in there. There we are. Okay, let's go ahead and join these two pieces together at our side seam right here. First off, I have a lot of fabric there that I don't need, so I'm going to trim some of this away carefully. Not too much. And now let's go ahead and, just like at Front Princess, bring these two pieces of fabric together, joining them. And make sure that the line that you drew on there, your side seam line, is nice. It should be touching the form. It shouldn't be up away. And just roll the two pieces of fabric together. And again, you're pinning through that line. That is the side seam line. Okay, right there should be pretty good for going up. Okay, and let's also pin down below waist. There we go. Let's turn it, and let's go ahead and mark this other side of our side seam now. Like so. And let's also mark our waist. To that point, we need to also connect our back princess. Okay, we've already marked this side of it. So let's go ahead and pin through. Okay, we have a lot of fabric here. Let's trim some of that back just to make it a little easier to work with. Again, be careful not to trim too much of it away. You don't want to have fabric, lose fabric and not be able to connect it. Okay, I'm going to start here at waist and join them together at the princess line, which I drew. And then work my way down. Okay, that should be far enough. Now let's go up. There we go. All right, let's finish marking here our waist and our bust line. And let's mark our princess, the other side of this princess seam here. There we go. Now we can remove some of these pins. Cut off this extra fabric. Okay, now all we're left to do is draw in our neckline of our corset and then the hem of it, or the bottom of it. So let's go ahead and do that. Depending on the shape you want, you could have cups that come like this, or you can just draw a straight one. Let's go ahead and draw one that's a little more interesting. It comes up like this, and then we'll bring it down below armhole, and then keep dropping it down as we come to center back. And let's make it come to a point. Okay? And then same thing here. Let's do the bottom, or the hem of it. We're going to come up like this. And then come back down as we come around to the back. Like so. Okay. There we have it. We've now draped a simple princess seam corset. Now we're ready to take off the patterns and true them, and then transfer them to paper.